That arrogant receptionist sneered at my ratty hoodie and branded me a street beggar, having absolutely zero clue she was insulting the man who owned her entire building. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind her, leaving the remaining 3 panel members staring at me in total confusion. Marcus, sitting to my left, shifted in his leather chair and tapped his pen against his legal pad. He looked from the door back to me, raising an eyebrow. David, care to fill us in on what just happened? Did you know her? We've crossed paths, I said, leaning back and letting my hands rest on the rest. I didn't elaborate. There was no need to drag the messy details of my property management into a venture capital session. The other 2 investors, Sarah and Tom, exchanged a quick look but dropped it. We had 12 more pitches to get through, and time was money. We marked her application as a withdrawal and moved on to a guy pitching an automated inventory system for craft breweries. But my mind kept drifting back to the look on her face. Her name was Elena. I remembered it from the termination report my cousin Leo had filed 8 months prior. Seeing her today, sweating under the fluorescent lights of a high-stakes pitch meeting, reminded me how small the professional world really is. She had gone from managing a front desk to trying to launch a tech startup, which required a level of grit I usually respected. It was just a shame her personal philosophy on human decency hadn't caught up with her ambitions. By 6 p.m., the session wrapped up. I shook hands with the panel, gathered my tablet, and headed down to the parking garage. As I pulled my 5-year-old sedan out onto the street, my phone buzzed through the dashboard Bluetooth. It was Leo. Hey, David, Leo said, his voice sounding a bit strained. You got a minute? Yeah, just driving home. What's up? Everything good at the flagship? The building is fine, Leo sighed. But I just got a frantic call from Elena. Apparently, she just saw you at the VC panel today. I pulled up to a red light and watched the windshield wipers clear a light drizzle. Yeah, she was one of the applicants. She walked out in the middle of her presentation. Man, she was crying on the phone to me, Leo said. He sounded more uncomfortable than angry. She somehow tracked down my number. Well, she kept it from when she worked here, I guess. She's begging me to talk to you. She claims her co-founder invested their entire life savings into this app, and they're already $40,000 in debt for development costs. If they don't get this seed round, they're done. She knows she screwed up with you last year, but she's asking for a second chance to pitch just to the other panel members without you there. I leaned against the steering wheel, watching the light turn green. Leo, she didn't just screw up. She showed me exactly how she treats people when she thinks nobody is looking. Why would I want to fund a business run by someone like that? I get it, I really do, was said quickly. And I'm not defending what she did to you. It was disgusting. But her co-founder is a guy named Julian. I actually know him through a mutual friend from college. He's a genuinely good engineer, totally brilliant, and he has no idea why their pitch just tanked. He thinks Elena just had a panic attack. Elena told me everything because she knows I'm your cousin and she's desperate. She's terrified she just ruined Julian's life along with her own. Then Julian needs a better partner, I said flatly. Just think about it, Leo asked quietly. Julian's a local kid. He put everything into this. It's not his fault his business partner has a trash personality. I'll think about it, I told him, switching lanes. But don't promise her anything, Leo. I mean it. We hung up and I drove home in silence. The rain was coming down harder now, blurring the neon signs of the downtown storefronts. When I got to my apartment, I didn't turn on the TV or make dinner right away. I sat at my kitchen island, booted up my laptop, and pulled up the digital portfolios of the day's applicants. I found Elena's company, Civic Connect. I skipped past her bio page and went straight to the technical architecture and the product demo video. Leo wasn't lying about the engineer. The back-end setup was incredibly clean. The app aimed to streamline localized networking for independent contractors and small businesses, removing the bloated corporate layers of platforms like LinkedIn. It had a smart, localized algorithmic matching system that actually made sense. It was a viable product with a real market fit. But as I scrolled down, I saw the ownership breakdown. Elena held 50% of the stake company, as the CEO and sissies held 49%. If I funded this project, 51% of my money would be directly empowering the woman who had called me a vagrant and tried to clear me out of my own building like trash. The next morning, I walked into my office at our real estate headquarters around 8:30 a.m. My assistant Claire was already at her desk, sorting through the morning mail. She looked up, holding a professional-looking courier envelope. "This just arrived for you personally, David," she said, handing it over. It didn't come through the standard VC submission portal. I tore it open. Inside was a neatly printed 5-page letter. The first page was on formal letterhead, but the text itself was deeply personal. It was from Elena. I sat down at my desk, poured a cup of black coffee, and started reading. She didn't make excuses. She explicitly referenced the day in the lobby, using words like unforgivable, arrogant, and deeply ashamed. She wrote that losing her job that day had been a massive wake-up call about her own biases and how she viewed people. She explained that she had spent the last 8 months working 80-hour weeks with Julian, building Civic Connect from scratch in a cramped basement apartment, pouring every dime of her severance and savings into it. Towards the end of the letter, there was a paragraph that made me pause. "I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, let alone your money. If you decide to reject our application based on my character, I completely understand and accept that consequence. My only regret is that Julian is paying the price for my past malice. He is a phenomenal developer who deserves this opportunity. If there is any way you can evaluate the platform solely on his merit, or allow him to pitch to your partners independently, I will legally step down as CEO effective immediately." I laid the letter down on the blotter. It was a strong play. Offering to step down showed she understood the gravity of the situation, or at least, she understood exactly what buttons to push to save her company. I picked up my desk phone and dialed Leo. "Hey, get me Julian's contact info. Don't tell Elena." 10 minutes later, I had an email address and a phone number. Instead of calling, I sent a brief formal email from my private venture account, inviting Julian to a private coffee meeting at a small diner 3 blocks away from my co-working space, the exact opposite of a high-end corporate boardroom. I told him to bring his laptop, and I explicitly requested that he come alone. I arrived at the diner 20 minutes early the next day. I chose a booth in the back, far away from the front windows, where the vinyl was cracked and the smell of grease and old coffee was thick. I was wearing a plain black t-shirt and jeans. At exactly 11 a.m., the diner's bell chimed. A young guy walked in looking incredibly nervous. He had dark circles under his eyes, an oversized backpack slung over one shoulder, and a wrinkled button-down shirt that looked like it had been pulled from the bottom of a laundry basket. He scanned the room, his eyes lingering on me for a second before looking past me. He didn't recognize me from the panel. He had been waiting outside the boardroom during Elena's pitch. I raised my hand. Julian? He blinked, walked over quickly, and extended a hand that was slightly damp with sweat. Mr. Vance, hi, thank you so much for meeting me. I honestly didn't think I'd get a response. Sit down, I said, gesturing to the booth. Want some coffee? Yes, please. Black is fine, he said, sliding his backpack onto the seat beside him and pulling out a battered MacBook. The waitress poured him a cup, and I waited until she walked away before speaking. Your partner, Elena, sent a letter to my office yesterday. I've also looked over your code and the application structure. Julian's posture went incredibly rigid. He looked down at his coffee cup, swallowing hard. Look, Mr. Vance, Elena told me what happened. Not just yesterday at the panel, but what happened 8 months ago at your building. She was completely honest with me last night. She told me she insulted you, that she got fired for it, and that her behavior was unacceptable. He looked up, his eyes wide and completely genuine. I had no idea. When I partnered with her, I just knew her as someone who was organized, driven, and knew how to handle the administrative side of things that I completely suck at. If I had known how she treated people, how she treated you, I never would have gone into business with her. She offered to step down, I noticed, watching his reaction closely. Julian let out a dry, humorless laugh. Yeah, she told me that too, but honestly, it's a mess. If she steps down right now, the company is functionally dead anyway. She holds the business network contacts. She's the one who spent the last 6 months talking to local merchants, setting up our beta testing groups, and handling the legal filing. I'm just a guy who types in the dark. If she leaves, I have a beautiful piece of software that nobody knows exists. If you guys reject us, we lose the server funding next month, and the whole thing goes under. He leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the table. I'm not asking you to like her, Mr. Vance. I don't even think I like her right now after finding out how she conducts herself. But please don't kill the project because of her mistake. We have 42 local businesses signed up for the pilot next week. It works. The platform really works. I took a sip of my coffee, letting the silence stretch between us for a few moments. Show me the matching algorithm, I said, pointing to his laptop. Explain to me how you handle data distribution without selling user profiles to third-party ad networks. That was missing from your pitch deck. Julian's face instantly transformed. The anxiety faded, replaced by the sharp, intense focus of a pure tech builder. He opened his laptop, flipped it around, and began explaining his custom encryption and localized node distribution. For the next 45 minutes, he spoke with absolute clarity and passion. He was the real deal, a top-tier developer who had tied his boat to a very compromised anchor. When he finished, he closed his laptop and looked at me, waiting for the verdict. The tech is solid, Julian, I said, pulling out a business card and sliding it across the table. Here's what's going to happen. I'm not funding Civic Connect through the VC panel. My partners are hesitant, and frankly, the drama is a bad look for a seed round. Julian's shoulders sagged, his face paling. Let me finish, I said. I am, however, prepared to make a private angel investment of $150,000 from my personal fund, but it comes with very strict, non-negotiable terms. He looked up, a glimmer of hope returning to his... What terms? First, Elena's shares are diluted immediately. She drops from 51% to 15%. You become the majority shareholder and CEO with 55%. My fund takes the remaining 30% along with the board seat. Second, Elena's role is strictly limited to operations and back-office administration. She is completely banned from public relations, client onboarding, or front-facing community management. If she interacts with a single customer or public partner in a way that reflects poorly on this company, my funding pulls out instantly via a morality clause. Julian stared at the card, digesting the numbers. That drops her power completely. She'd be working for me. Exactly, I said. And third, you don't tell her this offer came because of her letter. You tell her that I invested because of your tech, and that my terms require her to be sidelined due to her past liability. She needs to know her actions have a literal financial cost. Take 24 hours to talk it over with her. If she signs the restructuring agreement, my lawyers will have the paperwork ready on Monday. I stood up, threw a $20 bill on the table to cover the coffee, and walked out before he could answer. By Friday afternoon, I hadn't heard back from Julian. I figured Elena's ego might have been too large to accept a massive demotion in her own company, which was fine by me. It would save me $150,000 and a lot of headaches. I spent the day reviewing leasing contracts for a new property we were acquiring on the north side of town. At 5:30 p.m., my phone rang. It was an unknown number. David Vance, I answered. David, it's Julian. His voice was incredibly tense, and I could hear heavy traffic in the background. We have a problem. Did she refuse the terms? No, Julian said, letting out a ragged breath. She actually agreed to them. She signed the preliminary intent document I drew up. But that's not the issue. About an hour ago, our beta testing server for the pilot program got completely wiped. All the registration data for our 42 local merchant partners is gone. I sat up straight in my chair, pulling my laptop closer. An external hack? His voice dropping to a whisper. The access logs show it was done using an admin keycard login from inside your flagship co-working space. Someone used the high-speed network there to access our back-end deployment and delete the root directory. David, Elena's old login credentials for the co-working master network were somehow never deactivated when she was fired 8 months ago, and she's currently sitting in the lobby of your building, trying to figure out what happened. Don't say a word to her about this conversation, I said, my voice dropping an octave. Where are you right now? I'm in my car. I'm parked in the lot across the street from your building. I tracked her location through our shared developer account when the server went down. David, I'm freaking out. Stay in your car, I told him. Do not approach her. Do not text her. I'm 10 minutes away. I hung up and immediately dialed Leo. He picked up on the third ring, the sound of a sports game playing faintly in the background. He was clearly off the clock. Leo, get to your computer right now, I said. Whoa, okay. What's wrong? When you fired Elena 8 months ago, did you manually revoke her network admin credentials? I heard the rustle of him sitting up, a chair squeaking. I took her physical keycard. I told the IT vendor to wipe her digital access. Why? Because someone just used her old credentials to log into our flagship secure network and systematically delete the beta testing servers for her new company. A heavy silence hung on the line. David, I swear to God I submitted the IT ticket, but save the excuses. Pull the network access logs. I want to know exactly what IP address executed that command, what device it was, and where it was physically located in the building. I'm pulling up now. I parked my sedan in the reserved spot by the alley and walked around to the front entrance. The evening receptionist, a bright college student named Maya, gave me a polite wave as I walked through the glass doors. I didn't wave back. My eyes were fixed on the guest lounge area to the left. Elena was sitting in a high-backed acoustic chair. She looked like she hadn't slept in 3 days. She was wearing a faded college sweatshirt, a far cry from her polished pitch outfit, and her hands were shaking as she typed frantically on her laptop. She was openly weeping, wiping at her face with the sleeve of her shirt. I bypassed the lounge and went straight to the private elevator, swiping my owner's card to go directly to the server room in the basement. My phone buzzed. It was Leo. I've got the logs, he said, his voice tight. David, it wasn't a remote hack. It wasn't done over the guest Wi-Fi. Then how was it done? I asked, stepping out into the chilly humming air of the basement corridor. The IP address belongs to Terminal 4. It's the physical diagnostic desktop inside the server room itself. The command was executed on site, physically, at 5:12 p.m. Terminal 4 requires physical access to the room. The door is locked. Elena doesn't have a keycard anymore. Exactly, Leo said. Even if her digital login worked, she couldn't get through that door without a master badge. I walked up to the heavy steel door of the server room. The digital keypad glowed green. I pulled up the physical access log on the wall-mounted tablet next to the door. 5:10 p.m. Badge swipe sum, Julian Hayes. Vendor to guest access. I stared at the screen. The name stared back, Leo. I said quietly into the phone. Did we issue a guest vendor badge to someone named Julian Hayes today? Let me check the visitor log from this morning. Hold on. I heard him typing. Yeah, he came in at 10 a.m. Said he was here to do an emergency router diagnostic for one of our third-floor tenants. Maya issued him a temporary vendor badge that grants basement access. David, he just swiped out of the building at 5:18 p.m. The pieces clicked together with a sickening snap. Julian hadn't been parked outside tracking Elena. He had been inside. He had used her old credentials, which he probably found saved on her laptop or figured out through their shared development work, to log into our physical terminal. He wiped his own server. He was framing her. He wanted my money, but he knew Elena would never willingly drop to 15% equity without a vicious fight. He knew if he just came back to her with my ultimatum, it would destroy their partnership and tie the app up in a bitter legal battle over intellectual property. But if she committed corporate sabotage, if she supposedly lashed out and destroyed their work in a fit of rage, he could terminate her immediately for cause, take total control of the IP, and look like the tragic, brilliant victim who just needed a lifeline from an angel investor to rebuild. It was ruthless. It was brilliant. And it was deeply, incredibly flawed, because he didn't realize I owned the building and had direct access to the physical swipe logs. I turned around, walked back to the elevator, and hit the button for the lobby. Leo, cancel his temporary badge immediately, I said, and lock down Terminal 4. Take a picture of the physical logs, the network logs, everything. Timestamp it. I walked out of the elevator and straight into the lounge. Elena looked up as my shadow fell over her table. She physically flinched, her eyes widening in sheer panic. She stammered, slamming her laptop shut. I'm not trespassing, I swear. I have a day pass. Maya sold it to me. I just needed the high-speed connection. Something went wrong with our back end and... I know, I said, pulling up a chair and sitting directly across from her. I didn't raise my voice. I kept my tone perfectly even. Your entire beta testing database was just deleted. She stopped ceasing. How do you know that? Because Julian just called me to tell me, I said. He told me you did it. He said you logged into our network using your old admin credentials and wiped the servers. Elena stared at me, the color draining completely from her face. She looked like she was going to be sick. What? No, that's impossible. I didn't do that. I've been sitting in this chair since 3 p.m. trying to figure out why the user profiles were returning null errors. I don't even remember my old admin password. I know you didn't do it, Elena, I said quietly. She blinked, tears spilling over her eyelashes. You do? Yes, because the person who did it swiped a vendor badge to access my basement server room 12 minutes ago, and that person was Julian. She sat perfectly still. The ambient noise of the co-working space, the soft jazz playing over the speakers, the hum of the espresso machine, the distant chatter of a meeting seemed to amplify around us. Julian, she whispered. Why would Julian do that? That's our life. We have 42 merchants. We launch on Monday. He just destroyed his own work. Because I offered him a deal this morning, I said, leaning forward. I told him I would personally invest $150,000 into the company, but only if he diluted your shares to 15% and stripped you of all executive power. I watched the realization wash over her. It was a brutal thing to witness. The absolute betrayal breaking through the panic. She knew Julian. She knew his anxieties, his ambitions, his fear of failure. She knew exactly what he would do to secure that funding. He's framing me, she said, her voice hollow. He's going to use the morality clause in our operating agreement. If one partner commits intentional sabotage, the other can invoke an emergency buzz-out at zero valuation. He's trying to steal my company. He's trying to secure his funding, I corrected. He thinks he's cutting out the dead weight being you. She looked down at her hands. The arrogance she had displayed 8 months ago was completely gone. There was only exhaustion and the crushing weight of reality. So what happens now, she asked, not looking up. Do you still give him the money? I don't invest in people who burn down their own house to collect the insurance, I said. Julian just proved he's a liability. My offer is off the table. Then we're dead, she said simply. The server costs are due on the 1st. I have $0 in my checking account. My credit cards are maxed. Julian was supposed to pay the hosting fees this month. If he did this, he's definitely not paying them. I looked at her. I thought about the woman who had sneered at my clothes, who had called me a vagrant, who had humiliated me in this exact room. I thought about the letter she sent, and the genuine fear in her eyes right now. Where are your backup files? I asked. She looked up confused. The merchant data, the registration profiles. Where are the local backups? A developer as paranoid as Julian doesn't delete the only copy of his work. He backed it up before he wiped the cloud server. Where is it? On his physical hard drive, she said slowly. He keeps a mirror drive in his backpack. He never lets it out of his sight. He's sitting in his car across the street right now, I said, checking my watch. He thinks I'm driving here to meet him and figure out how to handle your betrayal. I told him to wait. Elena sat up straighter. The tears stopped. A very different kind of energy started to radiate from her. It was the survival instinct of someone who had nothing left to lose. Call him, she said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Tell him you're inside the building. Tell him you have me contained in an office and you need him to come inside with his laptop to show you the damage. I raised an eyebrow. And then what? She said, reaching into her bag and pulling out a thick legal document. We show him that I didn't sign the preliminary intent document he gave me this afternoon. I signed an addendum I drafted myself, one that requires a mandatory code audit by a neutral third party before any equity transfer can take place. And if he refuses to hand over the hard drive for that audit, I lock him out of the merchant network manually. I still have the master API keys for the client-side portal. He only controls the back end. She slid the document across the table. It was real. She had anticipated something was wrong. She hadn't trusted his sudden restructuring paperwork. He thinks he trapped you, I noted. He doesn't know I still hold the keys to the front door, she replied, her jaw set. Are you going to help me, Mr. Vance? Or are you going to sit back and watch me burn? I looked at the document sitting on the table between us. It was a standard equity transfer agreement, but she had scribbled out the bottom two paragraphs with a blue ballpoint pen and handwritten her own terms in the margins. It was messy, barely legible, and legally questionable, but it was leverage. Conference room B, I told her, standing up. It's down the hall past the kitchen. Go sit in there and do not come out until I open the door. She didn't argue. She grabbed her laptop in her bag, shoved the document inside, and power walked toward the hallway. I pulled out my phone and dialed Julian. He answered on the first ring. David, he said, his voice breathless, playing the part of the panicked founder perfectly. What's happening? Is she still there? She's here, I said, keeping my voice flat. I have her contained in a meeting room. She's a mess, Julian. She's claiming there was a system glitch. I need you to come inside right now. Bring your laptop and the backup hard drive. We need to assess exactly how much damage was done before I decide what my lawyers are doing on Monday. I don't know if I should be in the same room as her right now, he stammered. She might completely snap. She's not going to snap, I said. I own this building. Security is in the lobby. Get in here now, Julian. Bring the drive. I hung up before he could object again. I walked over to the front desk where Maya was organizing a stack of mail. I leaned over the counter. Maya, a guy named Julian is about to walk through those doors. He's got a temporary vendor badge from earlier today. Let him through, but as soon as he passes the turnstiles, I want you to go into the system and permanently deactivate his profile. He doesn't get back into the elevators or the basement. Got it, Mr. Vance, she said, her fingers already flying across her keyboard. I walked down the hall and stepped into conference room B. It was one of our premium suites. Soundproof glass, a heavy mahogany table, and 8 ergonomic mesh chairs. Elena was sitting at the far end, her back to the glass wall overlooking the alley. Her hands were folded on the table. They were shaking so badly she had to press them flat against the wood to keep them still. Sit in the corner, I told her. Turn your chair away from the door. Let him think I'm the only one in here at first. She nodded and quickly moved to a chair tucked into the corner, angling herself so the high back hid her from the doorway. 2 minutes later, I saw Julian walking quickly down the hall. His backpack was slung over one shoulder, and he was clutching his laptop to his chest like a shield. He looked through the glass, saw me standing at the head of the table, and pushed the door open. David, he said, breathing heavy. He let the door click shut behind him. Man, this is a nightmare. I can't believe she actually did it. Put the laptop on the table, I said. He set it down, pulling out his tangled charger. I checked the remote logs from my car. The entire merchant directory is gone. She didn't just delete the profiles. She wiped the malicious, David. It's intentional sabotage. And the backups? I asked. He patted his backpack. I have the physical mirror right here. Thank God I pulled a hard copy this morning. But honestly, we're going to lose at least 3 days of migration data. And the trust. How do I ever trust her again? The morality clause in our operating agreement is triggered. I have to terminate her equity. He looked at me, his eyes wide, waiting for my validation. He was waiting for the billionaire angel investor to pat him on the back and tell him he was making the hard, necessary choices of a real CEO. Julian, I said quietly. Maya at the front desk keeps very meticulous visitor logs. He froze. His hand hovered over the zipper of his backpack. What? She logs every vendor, I continued, leaning against the edge of the table. And the basement access panel logs every badge swipe. And Terminal 4 in the server room logs every localized keystroke. The color drained from his face so fast he looked physically ill. He took a half step back toward the door. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, his voice jumping an octave. The chair in the corner swiveled around. Elena stood up. She didn't look like the panicked, weeping woman from the lounge anymore. She looked like someone who had just watched a friend try to push her in front of a train. Terminal 4, Julian, Elena said, her voice shaking with a cold, hollow rage. You used my old credentials. You didn't even try to spoof the IP. You just walked into the basement and wiped our company. Julian stared at her. His mouth opened and closed, but nothing came out. He looked from Elena to me, his eyes darting toward the glass door. The security guard is standing at the end of the hall, I lied. There was no guard, but Julian was too panicked to check. Sit down. He collapsed into the nearest chair. He looked incredibly small. All the fake bravado, the stress genius act, it all evaporated. Give me the backup drive, Elena demanded, walking over and standing across the table from him. Give it to me right now. Julian looked down at his backpack. He didn't move. Julian, she said, her voice rising. You tried to steal my company. You tried to frame me for corporate sabotage. Hand over the drive, or I swear to God I will call the police right now and have you arrested for unauthorized access and data destruction. Julian let out a pathetic, dry laugh. He rubbed his hands over his face, leaving red marks marks on his cheeks. You're going to call the cops on me? Watch me, she snapped, reaching for her phone. Go ahead, Julian suddenly yelled, slamming his hand on the table. The sound echoed sharply in the soundproof room. Call them. Call the police, Elena. Tell them to look at the code. Tell them to do a full audit. Elena paused, her thumb hovering over her screen. What are you talking about? Julian looked up at her, and the fear in his eyes had been replaced by something much uglier, a bitter defensive resentment. You wanted to do a neutral third-party code audit before you signed the transfer? He sneered, nodding toward her bag. I saw your little handwritten addendum when you handed the folder back to me. You think you're so smart. You think you're protecting yourself. I am protecting myself, she said, from you. There is no code, Elena, Julian said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Not really. I stood up straight, crossing my arms. Explain that. Julian looked at me, a bitter smile twisting his mouth. The algorithm? The localized node distribution that you thought was so brilliant this morning, Mr. Vance? I didn't write it from scratch. I scraped it. Elena stepped back, bumping into her chair. You what I scraped it, Julian repeated almost proudly. From my last job at Horizon Tech, I took their proprietary matchmaking architecture, stripped the front-end UI, and recompiled it with our branding. The entire back-end of Civic Connect is stolen intellectual property. The silence in the room was absolute. I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning vent above us. You lied to me, Elena whispered. You told me you spent 2 years building that algorithm. I spent 2 years figuring out how to bypass Horizon's security protocols to get it out of their servers. Julian shot back. Do you have any idea how hard that was? You just sat around making phone calls and talking to coffee shop owners. You have no idea what it takes to actually build something that scales. I looked at Julian with genuine disgust. So you wiped the server today not just to frame her, but to destroy the evidence. Julian nodded slowly. Horizon announced a massive system audit next week. They're cracking down on ex-employees. If we launched on Monday with that code live on public servers, their crawlers would have flagged the architecture instantly. We would have been sued into oblivion by Tuesday. I had to wipe the beta test. I had to buy time to rewrite the core loops. And you were going to use my money to fund your rewrite, I said, while leaving Elena with the blame for the data loss. I was trying to save the company, Julian yelled, pointing a finger at Elena. She's a glorified secretary. She doesn't understand the tech. I'm the one carrying all the risk. Elena looked like she had been hit by a truck. The company she had poured her life savings into, the project she thought was going to redeem her career, was ticking legal time bombs. The backup drive, I said, looking at Julian's backpack. It has the stolen code on it. Yeah, Julian said, pulling the silver hard drive out of his bag and setting it on the table. It's the only copy left. The cloud is wiped. Horizon's architecture, our merchant data, the whole thing. It's all on here. He slid it into the middle of the mahogany table. So here's the reality, Elena, Julian said, his voice dripping with venom. You hold the client API keys. I hold the drive. If you lock me out, I walk out of here with this drive, and you have nothing. If you call the cops about me wiping the server, I hand this drive over to Horizon's legal team, and we both go to federal prison for corporate espionage. You are an equal partner. You signed the liability agreements. Elena stared at the silver rectangle on the table. Her breathing was shallow. She was trapped. She had outsmarted his initial frame job, only to realize the house she was fighting for was built on a landmine. Julian looked at me. I still want fielding. I can rewrite the back end in 3 weeks. Clean code. No stolen IP. But I need the 150s to keep the lights on, and she has to be out. That's the only way this works. I looked at the drive. Then I looked at Julian. He was sitting there, a thief and a liar, trying to negotiate terms in my building. You think you have leverage, Julian, I said, walking slowly around the table toward him. But you're forgetting one very important detail about where you are right now. You executed a data wipe of stolen corporate IP using my flagship building's primary network, I said. My voice completely level. Do you know what my legal team does when unauthorized proprietary code is processed through our servers? They isolate it, they trace it, and they report it to our cybersecurity insurers to clear our own liability. Julian stared at me, his hand slowly pulling away from the silver hard drive on the table. You didn't just screw Elena, I continued, closing the distance until I was standing directly across from him. You implicated my company in your corporate espionage, which means my IT department is legally obligated to hand over the unredacted Terminal 4 logs to Horizon Tech by tomorrow morning. I don't even have to lift a finger, it's automated compliance. You think you have a week before they figure it out? You have about 12 hours before their lawyers get a system-generated alert that their proprietary architecture was briefly hosted and then hastily deleted on a commercial server downtown. Julian's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The smug confidence he had walked in with was entirely gone, replaced by the suffocating realization that he had played himself into a corner he couldn't code his way out of. You're lying, he finally managed to say, his voice thin and reedy. You're just trying to scare me into giving up the equity. Julian, look around you, I said, gesturing to the heavy mahogany table, the acoustic glass, the discrete security cameras tucked into the ceiling corners. You think a multi-million-dollar commercial real estate firm operates on a residential router? Everything you type downstairs is already archived in an off-site backup in a different state. You didn't buy yourself time. You just handed Horizon the exact IP address and timestamp of your theft. Elena let out a sharp breath. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on Julian. You idiot, she whispered. You absolute. You burned everything down for nothing. Julian's hand started to shake. He looked at the hard drive, then at me, and finally at Elena. The fight completely drained out of him. He wasn't a mastermind. He was just a stressed, cornered guy who had stolen something he didn't understand how to hide, and then panicked when the walls started closing in. Okay, Julian said, his voice cracking. He rubbed his temples, his breathing turning shallow and rapid. Okay, look, we can fix this. David, you have the resources. You can stop the automated report. You can have your IT guys scrub the Terminal 4 logs before the insurance audit catches it. I stared at him, genuinely amazed at the audacity. You want me to commit federal tampering to cover up your theft? I need that money, Julian blurted out, the panic fully taking over. David, you don't understand. I didn't just quit Horizon to do this. I was being forced out. I have $80,000 in personal debt. I maxed out 3 credit cards to cover the server costs and my rent for the last 6 months because Lena insisted we bootstrap this thing instead of taking early venture capital. I need the 150 grand. If Horizon sues me, I'm bankrupt. I'm literally going to lose my apartment next week. Elena stood up. The shock had worn off and now the anger was radiating off her in waves. You maxed out your credit cards, she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Julian, I sold my car. I cashed out my 401k. I haven't bought a new pair of shoes in 8 months because I was putting every spare dollar into our marketing budget. And you sat across from me every single day and watched me do it knowing the product was stolen? I was going to rewrite it, Julian yelled back, slamming his fist on the table. Once we got the seed money, I could have hired freelancers. I could have patched out the Horizon architecture before we went to public launch. I just needed the bridge capital. You're a fraud, she said, her voice dripping with disgust. You're not a brilliant developer. You're a thief who couldn't even steal correctly, Julian sneered, his fear briefly giving way to a petty, vicious pride. And what are you, Elena? You're a fired receptionist playing CEO. You don't know a line of code from a grocery list. Without me, you're nothing. You're just a woman in a cheap sweatshirt begging for office space. The room went dead silence. Elena didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just looked at him with a cold, terrifying clarity. 8 months ago, insultant like that would have made her lash out. It would have made her arrogant and defensive. But standing here now, completely stripped of her ego, facing the total ruin of her company, she didn't flinch. She reached into her bag, pulled out her laptop, and set it on the table. She opened it and typed in her password. What are you doing? Julian asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. Elena didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the screen, her fingers moving rapidly over the keyboard. When we drafted the operating agreement, Julian, you insisted on a morality clause. You wanted to make sure that if my past behavior, the reason I got fired from this building, ever came back to haunt our public image, you could sever my equity. Yeah, Julian said defensively. So I agreed, Elena said, her voice perfectly steady. But I made sure the lawyer applied the clause symmetrically. Any action by a partner that exposes the company to criminal liability, regulatory sanctions, or intentional financial sabotage triggers an immediate unilateral forfeiture of shares. Julian frowned. I didn't commit financial sabotage. I deleted a beta test to protect us from Horizon. You logged into a commercial network using my stolen credentials, she said, clicking the mouse. You executed a data wipe without board approval. And you just admitted, on tape, because David's security cameras in these premium suites record audio, that you stole proprietary IP from a former employer, exposing Civic Connect to massive corporate litigation. Julian's head snapped toward the small black dome in the corner of the ceiling. You're bluffing. He wouldn't record private meetings. It's a liability failsafe for enterprise clients, I interjected smoothly, deciding to play along with Elena's leverage. It automatically engages when the door locks. It was a lie. The cameras were video only, but Julian was too far gone to know the difference. Elena hit the enter key with a definitive click. I just invoked the morality clause, she said, finally looking up at him. I sent the digital notice to our registered agent and copied you on the email. As of this exact second, your shares are forfeited to the company treasury. You are no longer a partner in Civic Connect. You're just a liability. Julian stared at her, completely stunned. Then he laughed, a harsh, desperate sound. You can't do that. You don't have a product without me. I don't have a product with you, she replied coldly. I have a lawsuit. She reached across the table and grabbed the silver hard drive. Julian lunged for it, but I stepped in, planting my hand firmly in the center of his chest and shoving it back into his chair. Don't, I warned him. My voice wasn't loud, but there was enough weight behind it to make him freeze. You lay a hand on her in my building, and I won't wait for Horizon to sue you. I'll have security drag you out into traffic. Julian stayed in the chair, his chest heaving. He looked at the hard drive in Elena's hand, then up at her face. You're crazy, he said, his voice trembling. What are you going to do with that? If you plug that into a new server, Horizon will find you. You can't use the code. I know, Elena said. She walked over to the corner of the room where a heavy stainless steel trash can sat next to a paper shredder. She held the drive over the bin. That's why I'm not going to use it. She dropped it. The metal casing clattered loudly against the bottom of the empty can. The code is gone, Julian, she said, turning back to him. The stolen IP is gone. And since you just admitted you wiped the cloud server to cover your tracks, there's no digital footprint left for Horizon to find. You destroyed the evidence for me. Julian looked like he was going to hyperventilate. The merchant data was on there. The entire beta list, the vendor contracts. You just threw away 8 months of work. I threw away a poisoned well, Elena corrected him. I still have my notebooks. I still have my phone contacts. I know every single one of those 42 merchants by name because I'm the one who sat in their offices and convinced them to sign up. I can get them back. I can rebuild the client list. She walked back to the table, closed her laptop, and slid it into her bag. You have 5 minutes to leave this building, Julian, she said, her voice dropping to a low, absolute calm. If I ever see you again, if you ever try to contact me, or if you ever try to claim ownership of this company, I will walk straight into Horizon's corporate office and tell them exactly what you did. Julian sat there in silence. He looked at me, looking for a lifeline, an intervention, anything. I just stared back at him, my arms crossed. I wasn't going to save him. He had dug his own grave, and Elena had just kicked him into it. He slowly stood up. He grabbed his backpack, his hands shaking so badly he could barely manage the zipper. He didn't say another word. He didn't look at Elena. He just turned and walked out of the conference room, his footsteps echoing down the hallway until he disappeared around the corner. The heavy glass door clicked shut behind him. The silence in the room was heavy, thick with the adrenaline that was suddenly rapidly draining from both of us. Elena stood perfectly still for a long moment, staring at the empty doorway. Then her knees buckled. She collapsed into the nearest chair, dropping her face into her hands. She didn't cry. She just let out a long, ragged exhale that sounded like it had been held in for a year. I walked over to the coffee station in the corner, poured a glass of water from the carafe, and set it on the table in front of her. I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. The cameras don't record audio, I said quietly. She looked up, her eyes red, and let out a dry, exhausted chuckle. I figured. But he didn't. No, I agreed. He didn't. I looked at the trash can in the corner. You really just threw away your entire company. I threw away a felony, she said, taking water. Her hands were still shaking slightly. He was right about one thing. I'm broke. I have nothing left. The server bills are due. My rent is due. And I don't even have a minimum viable product to show investors anymore. It's just me and a list of angry merchants who are going to wonder why the app isn't launching on Monday. She leaned back in the chair and looked at me, her expression unreadable. So what now, Mr. Vance? Do you call security to escort me out? I don't have a day pass for tomorrow. I looked at the woman sitting across from me. She had been arrogant, cruel, and profoundly misguided 8 months ago. But over the last hour, I had watched her navigate a total betrayal, outmaneuver a corporate thief, and willingly destroy her only asset just to keep her integrity intact. She hadn't made excuses. She had just survived. Your logic is flawed, I said, tapping my fingers on the mahogany table. She frowned, confusion breaking through her exhaustion. What logic? You said you don't have a product, I said, leaning forward. But you do. Civic Connect was never the matchmaking algorithm. Any competent developer can write a localized routing script. The product was the 42 independent businesses who trusted you enough to sign up for a platform that didn't even exist yet. You built a network through sheer willpower and a lot of shoe leather. That's the hard part. Elena stared at me, not daring to speak. I told Julian I wasn't funding the company through the VC panel because of the drama, I continued. And I told him I wouldn't invest in a liability. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a sleek silver pen, and placed it on the table between us. I need a general manager for a new commercial property I'm acquiring on the north side of town, I said, my voice completely businesslike. It's a massive space. 3 floors of retail, co-working, and independent contractors. It needs someone who knows how to talk to local merchants. It needs someone who knows how to build a community from the ground up. Elena swallowed hard. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a salary, I corrected. Enough to pay your rent, cover your debts, and keep you afloat. But I'm not hiring you as a standard employee. I'm bringing you in as a contractor. I pulled a blank sheet of paper from the center folio on the table and slid it toward her. You're going to rebuild Civic Connect, I said, from scratch. Clean code, no stolen IP. I have a team of in-house developers at my real estate firm who handle our internal tenant apps. They're bored, they're brilliant, and they work for me. I will lease them to you at a severely discounted rate. Elena's eyes widened. She looked at the paper, then at the pen, and then at me. Why? Why would you do that for me? After how I treated you? Because you're not that person anymore, I said bluntly. I watched you look a crisis in the face today and make the hardest possible choice. You didn't compromise. You didn't take the easy way out. I can teach someone how to be polite in a lobby. I can't teach someone how to have a spine. She didn't reach for the pen right away. She just stared at it, the silver barrel reflecting the harsh overhead lights of the conference room. I knew what she was thinking. It was a massive pill to swallow. 8 months ago, she thought she was better than me. An hour ago, she thought she was an equal partner in a tech startup. Now, she was staring at an employment contract to be a glorified property manager for the guy she once tried to kick out onto the street. She looked up at me. I don't know anything about commercial leasing. You know how to get 42 independent business owners to trust you with their time and data, I said. Leasing is just getting them to trust you with their rent. It's the same muscle. She reached out, her fingers brushing the edge of the paper. And the app? You'd really let me use your team? Under a strict development loan, I clarified. You'll pay market rate for their hours, but we'll defer the invoices until the platform generates revenue. If it fails, the debt converts to equity in whatever IP you manage to salvage. If it succeeds, you pay me back with interest. It wasn't a gift. It was a lifeline with teeth. Elena picked up the pen. She didn't read the fine print. She just flipped to the last page and signed her name. The new property was a sprawling 3-story brick warehouse in the historic district. We had gutted it over the winter, turning the top 2 floors into open-plan co-working spaces and the ground floor into retail bays. It was supposed to be a hub for local makers and independent tech contractors. The problem was, the anchor tenant we inherited with the building purchase was a massive pain in the ass. His name was Arthur Vance, no relation to me, much to my annoyance. Arthur owned a bespoke furniture restoration company that took up a third of the ground floor. He had a grandfathered lease that I couldn't break, and he hated the renovation. He hated the noise. He hated the new tech bro aesthetic, and most of all, he hated management. I gave Elena the master keys on Monday morning. Your first job is Arthur, I told her, standing in the dusty lobby as construction crews hauled drywall past us. He's withholding his cam fees. He claims our construction dust ruined 3 antique armoires. I need him paying his share by Friday, or we delay the grand opening. She looked at the massive wooden double doors of Arthur's workshop. How much is he withholding? 12 grand. She adjusted the strap of her bag. I didn't hold my breath, but I also didn't step in to save her. I went upstairs to the temporary leasing office and started reviewing the architectural plans for the VAC system. About 3 hours later, Elena walked in. She looked exhausted, her hair pulled back in a messy clip, a smudge of wood stain on her sleeve. She dropped a signed cashier's check for $12,000 onto my desk. I stared at it. How did you get this? I listened to him, she said flatly, pulling up a chair and collapsing into it. He didn't care about the dust. He was pissed because the construction crews were parking in his loading zone, meaning his freight deliveries had to park 2 blocks down. I went outside, fired the parking supervisor, moved the trucks myself, and promised Arthur exclusive access to the alley loading dock from 8 to noon. It was exactly the right move. Good, I said. Now call my lead developer, Marcus. He's expecting you to pitch him the back-end rebuild for Civic Connect at 2. Elena nodded, but she didn't get up. She just sat there staring at her phone. The screen was dark, but she kept turning it over in her hands. What's wrong? I asked. Julian, she said softly. I frowned. Did he contact you? I told him if he came near you. He didn't contact me, she interrupted. He contacted the merchants. She finally unlocked her phone and slid it across the desk. It was an email thread forwarded to her by the owner of a local coffee roastery, one of the original 42 beta testers. I read it. Julian had sent a mass email to the entire beta list at 6 a.m. It was a masterpiece of corporate victimhood. He didn't mention the stolen code, obviously. Instead, he claimed that Elena Elena had violently forced him out of the company in a hostile takeover, leveraging a technicality in their operating agreement to steal his IP. He framed himself as the hardworking, destitute coder who was just robbed by a ruthless, manipulative administrator. But the worst part was the end. He warned the merchants that Elena was planning to sell their user data to a corporate real estate firm to cover her debts. He explicitly named my company. Half the beta list has already replied to this, Elena said, her voice hollow. They're demanding their data be purged. They're threatening to go to the local press. The coffee roaster told me I'm banned from his shop. Julian couldn't use the code, so he decided to burn the bridge on his way out. He was salting the earth. I pushed the phone back to her. You have their data? No, she said. Julian wiped the servers, remember? The only thing I have is their contact information on my personal phone. But they don't know that. They think I'm sitting on a gold mine of their customer demographics and financial projections, ready to sell it to you. And how does this affect my building? I asked. It was a cold question, but I needed to see how she handled it. Elena didn't flinch. She was learning. 5 of those merchants were people I was going to pitch for the retail bays downstairs. If this narrative takes hold, they won't just pull out of Civic Connect. They'll boycott this property. You won't get independent businesses in here. You'll get corporate chains, which violates the zoning variance you applied for with the city. She had done her homework. So Julian is jeopardizing my leasing strategy, I said. Yes. How do you want to play it? I asked, leaning back in my chair. She looked out the window at the construction crews below. I can't send an email refuting it. It turns into a he said, she said. And I can't tell them the truth about the stolen code, because if that leaks, Horizon Tech gets wind of it, and they might still sue me as a former partner just to make an example out of us. She was right. The stolen IP was a loaded gun sitting on the table. We couldn't use it, but we couldn't point to it either. So what's the play? I asked again. Elena stood up. The exhaustion was still there, but her eyes were sharp. I need to get them all in a room, face to face. I need to look them in the eye and show them exactly what I have, which is nothing. Exactly, she said. I need to show them the empty servers. But I need Julian in that room too. I raised an eyebrow. You want to invite the guy who just framed you to a town hall with the people he poisoned against you? He won't come if I invite him, she said. He'll think it's a trap, but he will come if one of the merchants invites him. He's playing the victim. He needs their validation. If the coffee roaster tells him they're holding a meeting to figure out a class action lawsuit against me, Julian will show up just to fan the flames. It was a massive risk. If Julian spun the room, Elena would lose whatever shred of reputation she had left, and my building would become a pariah in the local business community. Do it, I told her. You have the conference space on the 2nd floor. Set it up for Thursday evening. Let the construction crews clear out by 5. She didn't waste any time. For the next 3 days, Elena practically lived in that unfinished building. She wasn't just managing the contractors and dealing with Arthur downstairs. She was working the phones. I watched her from my temporary office. She didn't plead with the merchants. She didn't sound desperate. She just called them, one by one, and told them she heard their concerns and was hosting an open book session on Thursday to answer any questions about their data. The coffee roaster took the bait. He reached out to Julian, just like she predicted. Thursday rolled around. The air in the building smelled of fresh paint and cut lumber. We set up folding chairs in the center of the vast exposed brick room on the 2nd floor. I sat in the very back, leaning against a support pillar, keeping myself out of the immediate eye line. I was wearing my usual gray hoodie and faded jeans. I looked like a construction worker who is late. At 6 p.m., they started arriving. The merchants. These were hard-working people. Bakery owners, freelance designers, local bookstore managers. They looked defensive. They walked in small clusters, whispering to each other, eyeing Elena with outright suspicion. She stood at the front of the room, wearing a simple black blazer and jeans, holding a single manila folder. By 6:15, there were about 30 people in the room. And then the elevator dinged. Julian walked out. He was playing the part perfectly. He looked disheveled, nervous, wearing a worn-out sweater, holding his laptop to his chest. He saw Elena and immediately stopped, doing a great performance of a man walking into the lion's den. A few of the merchants walked over to him, patting his shoulder, murmuring words of support. Julian soaked it in. He looked over at Elena, and for just a split second, I saw the vicious, triumphant smirk flash across his face before he buried it under his victim persona. Elena didn't react. She waited until everyone was seated. Thank you for coming, she started, her voice projecting clearly across the empty space. I know tensions are high. You all received an email from Julian on Monday stating that I hijacked Civic Connect and intend to sell your proprietary data to a corporate entity. A murmur went through the crowd. The coffee roaster, a burly guy in a denim apron named stood up. Are you denying it? He demanded. Because Julian showed us the severance paperwork you forced on him. He showed us the digital log where you locked him out of the admin portal. You kicked out the guy who built the app, Elena. What the hell are we supposed to think? Julian sat in the front row, looking at his shoes, playing the martyr. Elena nodded. It's true. I did lock him out. I invoked a morality clause to sever his equity. The room erupted in angry whispers. Julian looked up, feigning shock at her admission. But before you decide to sue me or boycott this building, Elena continued, raising her voice just enough to cut through the noise, I want to address the core of your concern. Your data. Your customer lists, your financial projections, your private beta profiles. She walked over to a small folding table where a single laptop sat connected to a projector. She tapped the keyboard, and the large white wall behind her lit up. It was a live view of the Civic Connect backend dashboard. This is the master server, Elena said. She clicked on the tab labeled Merchants Directory. The screen went blank. Just a massive glaring white page with a single line of text. Error 404. Directory empty. She clicked on user profiles. Empty. Financial ledgers. Empty. Mike the merch squinted at the screen. What is this? Where is our data? It's gone, Elena said, flatly. Every single byte of it. There is nothing to sell. There is nothing to exploit. The entire data space was permanently wiped last Friday at 5:12 p.m. The room went dead silent. Then the panic said, what do you mean? wiped. A woman from a local boutique yelled. We spent weeks uploading our inventory list to that beta. You deleted it? I didn't delete it, Elena said. She turned and pointed directly at Julian. He did. Julian jumped up from his chair. That is a lie. She's lying. I told you, she took control of the network. Julian, Elena cut him off, her voice cracking like a whip. She didn't yell, but the sheer authority in her tone made him stop. She opened the Manila folder. I have the physical access logs from the basement server room of the building where the wipe occurred. It requires a physical badge swipe to enter. My badge was revoked 8 months ago, but a temporary vendor badge was issued at 10 a.m. on Friday to a man named Julian Hayes. That badge swiped into the server room at 5:10 p.m. The wipe command was executed from the physical terminal inside that room at 5:12 p.m. The badge swiped out of the building at 5:18 p.m. She pulled out the printed logs and held them up. I will hand these out to anyone who wants to read them. It's a matter of public record for the building security. Julian was completely frozen. He hadn't anticipated this. He thought she was just going to try and defend her character. He didn't think she would bring the receipt. He wiped it, Elena told the room, her voice steady, looking directly at the merchants. He destroyed your data, your hard work, and my company because he made a catastrophic technical error in the core code and panicked when he realized it couldn't be fixed before launch. He destroyed the house rather than admit the foundation was cracked. And then he sent you an email blaming me. Mike looked from Elena to Julian. Julian, is that true? Julian was sweating now. He gripped his laptop tightly against his chest. You don't understand the technical side, he stammered, looking around the room. The code, it was compromised. I had to scrub the database to protect us. She wouldn't listen to me. She just cared about the launch date. You told us she stole it to sell it, the boutique owner said, stepping toward him. You didn't say anything about the code being compromised. You lied to us. Julian was backing up toward the aisle. She forced me out. She took my equity. I took equity because you destroyed our product. Elena fired back, stepping away from the projector and walking right up to him. You burned this company to the ground, Julian, and now you're trying to use these people, my friends, my clients, to salvage your ego. The room was turning on him. It was palpable. These were small business owners. They knew what it meant to lose data, to face a catastrophic failure, but they despised a liar even more. Julian looked around, realizing he had entirely lost control of the narrative. He looked toward the back of the room and saw me lean against the pillar. I didn't move. I just watched him. He pointed a shaking finger at me. He's behind this, David Vance. He's the billionaire who bought her out. They're working together to ruin me. The room turned to look at me. I pushed off the pillar and walked slowly down the center aisle. I kept my hands in the pockets of my hoodie. I haven't bought anything, Julian, I said, my voice calm, carrying easily in the quiet room. I offered you a lifeline last week, and you chose to try and frame your business partner for a felony instead. I'm just here because I own this building, and I don't particularly like it when people stand in my property and lie to my prospective tenants. I stopped next to Elena, turning to face the crowd of merchants. My name is David Vance, I told them. I own this development, and for the record, I have zero interest in your beta data. What I am interested in is leasing these ground floor retail bays to independent businesses who know how to weather a storm. I looked at Mike. Elena told me you run a solid operation. She was going to pitch you the corner suite. The big guy looked completely thrown. He looked at Julian, who was now practically sprinting for the elevator, then at Elena, and finally at me. The data is really gone, he asked, his anger deflating into exhaustion. It's gone, Elena said softly. I'm so sorry, Mike. I really am. Mike rubbed the back of his neck. So what the hell are we doing here? Civic Connect is dead. The old version is dead, Elena corrected him, because the developer was a fraud. But the network isn't dead. You are the network. She gestured to the room. Look around. You're all here. You're all talking to each other. That was the whole point of the app, to bypass the corporate gatekeepers and build a local supply chain. The code is gone, but the concept is sitting in these folding chairs. She took a deep breath. She was going entirely off script now. This wasn't something we had discussed. I am rebuilding the backend, Elena announced, from scratch. I have secured an enterprise-grade development team. It will take 3 months, but I'm not asking you to wait 3 months. I'm asking you to start now, manually. We use this space. We hold a physical networking market here every Thursday night until the app launches. No fees, no corporate sponsors, just us. A quiet ripple went through the room. They weren't cheering, but they weren't walking out either. They were listening. Elena was literally rebuilding her company with her bare hands, using my unfinished concrete floors as the foundation. Mike crossed his arms. 3 months. If it's not live in 3 months, I'm out for good. 3 months, Elena promised. The meeting slowly broke up. People started mingling, cautiously talking to Elena, asking about the retail spaces downstairs. I stayed back, letting her work the room. She was good at it. She didn't hide from the failure. She owned it, and it was earning her back their respect. By 8 p.m., the room was mostly empty. Elena was stacking the folding chairs, looking completely drained but grounded. I walked over to help her with a stack. Before I could say anything, the elevator dinged one last time. A man in a cheap, poorly fitting gray suit stepped out. He didn't look like a merchant. He looked bored. He held a thick manila envelope in his right hand. He looked around the empty room, his eyes landing on Elena. Elena Rostova, he asked. She stopped stacking the chairs. Yes? The man walked over, slapped the envelope against her chest, and let it drop into her hands. You've been served, he said flatly, turning around and walking right back into the elevator. Elena stared at the envelope. She slowly pulled the tab and slid out a thick stack of legal documents. I watched her eyes scan the first page, the exhaustion returning to her face tenfold. What is it? I asked. It's from Julian, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. He's suing me in civil court. Breach of fiduciary duty, wrongful termination of equity, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. He's demanding a complete freeze on Civic Connect's assets and a court injunction preventing me from developing any software that competes with his original vision. I reached out and gently pulled the stack of papers from her shaking hands. The pages were heavy, printed on cheap legal stock. I flipped through the first 3 pages of the filing. It was boilerplate intimidation tactics. drafted by some strip mall attorney Julian, probably found on a billboard and promised a cut of the settlement. Julian was betting everything on the assumption that Elena was broke, terrified, and without legal representation. He figured an injunction would starve her out before she ever saw the inside of a courtroom. But as I read the specific claims, I actually let out a short, genuine laugh. Elena looked at me like I had lost my mind. David, he's gonna freeze my bank account. He's gonna lock me out of the building. How is this funny? He's claiming sole ownership of the original vision, I asked, tapping the paragraph with my finger. He's legally asserting that he is the primary architect of the Civic Connect back-end codebase. Yes, she said, her voice tight. He wants an injunction to stop me from building anything that resembles it. Elena, I said, handing the papers back to her. He just put it in writing. In a public court filing, he just legally claimed ownership of the code he stole from Horizon Tech. She stopped, her eyes widened, darting down to the paper, reading the lines again. The color started to return to her face. He was so desperate to stop you from moving forward, I said, that he forgot what he was actually claiming to own. He didn't just leave a digital footprint. He handed the state a signed confession of corporate espionage. I pulled out my phone and dialed Sarah, the lead litigator for my real estate firm. She was a woman who charged $1,000 an hour and earned every single penny. She picked up on the second ring. Sarah, I have a situation at the new Northside property, I said. A former partner of my new general manager just filed a frivolous civil suit and an injunction against her. I want you to represent her on my retainer. Send me the docket number, Sarah said, the sound of a keyboard clacking in the background. What's the play? The plaintiff is claiming sole ownership of a software architecture, I told her. But I happen to know that architecture is proprietary IP stolen from Horizon Tech. I want you to draft a response welcoming a full discovery process, specifically regarding the origins of his codebase. And then, I want you to take his public filing, highlight his claim of ownership, and anonymously courier it to Horizon Tech's general counsel first thing tomorrow morning. Sarah chuckled. It was a cold, efficient sound. He'll be buried in corporate litigation by noon. Call his lawyer at 9 a.m., I added. Let them know who is backing the defense, and let them know what's heading Horizon's way. Tell them if he drops the suit immediately and signs a permanent non-compete, we won't push for legal fees. Consider it done, Sarah said. I hung up the phone and looked at Elena. She was staring at me, clutching the manila envelope against her chest. Julian drops the suit tomorrow morning, I told her. He has to, or Horizon will destroy him. You don't have to worry about him ever again. She took a deep, shaky breath, looking around the massive, empty room. The folding chairs were still scattered. The projector was still humming quietly on the table. It was just the two of us standing in the dust of a construction site, but for the first time in a week, the air felt clear. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me, I said, zipping up my hoodie. Just make sure Mike gets his coffee roaster set up in the corner bay by the first of the month. I want this place smelling like espresso when the drywall goes up. The next morning played out exactly as Sarah predicted. Julian's lawyer called her office at 9:15 a.m. in an absolute panic. By 10:30 a.m., the lawsuit was withdrawn with prejudice, and a signed non-disclosure and non-compete agreement was sitting in Sarah's inbox. We never heard from Julian again. The grapevine later confirmed that Horizon Tech caught wind of his sloppy data wipe anyway, and hit him with a crushing cease and desist that effectively blacklisted him from the local tech industry. Elena didn't gloat. She didn't even celebrate. She just went to work. Over the next 3 months, she practically lived in the building. She hosted the Thursday night networking markets, starting with just folding tables and the original 30 merchants. By month 2, it had grown to 60. By month 3, there was a wait list to get in the door. She filled every single ground floor retail bay before the construction was even finished. Even Arthur, the cranky furniture restorer, ended up renewing his lease for another 5 years after Elena negotiated a bulk discount for him to supply the custom desks for our co-working floors. And true to her word, she worked with my development team to rebuild Civic Connect. They didn't scrape code. They built it clean, from the ground up, entirely funded by the revenue she was pulling in from the Thursday markets. When the app finally launched on a rainy Tuesday in October, it didn't crash. It just worked. Fast forward a year and a half. The Northside flagship is now the most profitable property in my portfolio. I don't have to manage it. I rarely even have to look at the quarterly reports, because Elena runs it with absolute precision. She paid back the development loan 6 months early, and Civic Connect is currently expanding its localized network to 3 neighboring cities. Last Wednesday, I decided to do another unannounced walkthrough, just for old time's sake. I parked my sedan in the alley, wearing a faded pair of jeans and a 10-year-old band t-shirt that had a small hole near the collar. I walked through the heavy glass doors of the lobby. The place was buzzing. The coffee shop was packed, people were having meetings in the glass-walled pods, and the community board was covered in local business flyers. I walked up to the front desk. Elena was standing there, training a new receptionist. She was holding a clipboard, pointing out something on the scheduling software. She wasn't wearing a tailored blazer. She was wearing a comfortable, oversized gray hoodie and a pair of beat-up sneakers. She looked up, saw me, and stopped. She didn't panic. She didn't sneer. She just smiled, a genuine, tired, happy smile. Hey, David, she said, tapping the desk. You looking for a day pass, or are you just here for the free coffee? I leaned against the marble counter. I don't know. Depends on how you treat the vagrants. Elena laughed, turning to the new receptionist. Maya, this is David. Give him the grand tour, and don't let the shirt fool you. He owns the place.